Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the Open Ownership Tech Showcase. It's the fourth tech showcase that we've had. My name is Stephen. I'm from Open Ownership. I'm the Data and Technology Manager, and I'm presenting today with my colleague Argus. Argus, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm Agustina. I'm Data Engagement Manager at Open Ownership.
Great. So we've actually got 4 presentations today. We've had a late edition, so apologies. The screen you can see now only mentions 3. But we have Andrew Dunn from OpenCorporates presenting first, Jean Villedieu from Linkurious, Cosmin Marginean from Blue Anvil, and then Kate Wyatt, who's going to present from the Competition and Markets Authority in the UK as well. So the way that we run these sessions is I'll shortly be handing over to each of the speakers who have between 10 and 15 minutes to present the latest work and the projects that they're working on. There'll be a short opportunity after each presentation for any questions you have, any discussion. So please, if you do have questions, if you want to put them in the chat as we go, then I'll try to put them to the speakers, or we'll call on you to ask them yourselves. Yeah, so we'll be recording the whole thing and publishing on YouTube and sharing that link with everyone later in case there are people who aren't able to make it today. And we hope you find it really interesting to hear about the projects that everyone's been working on. Just very briefly, hopefully people are familiar with Open Ownership. We're a not-for-profit focused on beneficial ownership transparency. So doing a lot of work around beneficial ownership data, and specifically at the moment, a lot on beneficial ownership data in the extractive industry. So I wanted to hand to Argus just to quickly mention up front an opportunity that we've got that might be of interest to people on this call.
Thank you, Stephen. So yes, as part of our objective of increasing the availability and use of beneficial ownership data, we have recently launched an open call for proposals for non-government data users interested in using and analyzing bio data in the extractive sector in particular. So here in the chat, you will be able to see a link to our website where you can see all the details, the objectives, and what we're looking for. Just below the image, you will be able to access to it either in English, Spanish, or French. And you will see all the details, templates, and everything that we're expecting. Deadline to submit proposals is June 1st at midnight, wherever you're based. And we have 11 countries as priorities where you can see all the details there. So we are really looking forward to innovative and great proposals to use different types of data, including beneficial ownership, and particularly to improve natural resources governance in the extractive sector.
Great, thank you, Argus. So without further ado, let's hand over to our first speaker. So Andrew, I'll hand over to you to introduce yourself and to say what you're going to be speaking about today.
Cool. Thank you, Stephen, and thanks for inviting me along to present. So I'm Andrew Dunn. I am OpenCorporates CTO. I'm actually reasonably new to OpenCorporates, as I joined tail end of November. And prior to that, I was in a KYC AML business, where I was also the CTO. So I actually had hands-on experience of using OpenCorporates data and starting to wander around some of those use cases. So the intention today was to kind of, one, introduce OpenCorporates to you all, because I don't necessarily know whether everyone on the call knows what OpenCorporates does and what they stand for and what their mission happens to be, but then also talk to you about more around how we're going to take our product forward, again, which is important for the use cases that I describe. So OpenCorporates, for those of you who don't know, we're the largest open database of companies in the world. So not to say that we are the largest database of corporate information, we're the largest open and transparent source of corporate information. So as you know, I'm sure you'll all be aware, there are a number of black box or grey box providers of this corporate information, but where we see the biggest benefit is having open and transparent information. And we do that by maintaining a line of sight back to the original official source. And by doing that, we support well over 500 organizations using this data, ranging from people doing investigative work using our website to actually taking bulk data and powering some of the latest generation of regtechs and fintechs out there. what we are is we believe that we're leaders in this space because we've been doing it for 10 years. You know, I joined the business, but I'm really standing on the shoulders of giants in terms of the amount of effort that has been gone into sourcing official registry data. So Chris Taggart, the founder of OpenCorporates, and still today does a fair amount of lobbying on behalf of OpenCorporates to make sure that this data is open and can be used by individuals. So by doing that, we think we have carved ourselves out a path to be leaders in this space. And our ethos has been around transparency, and with that transparency, provenance of that data back to source. And then ultimately, we've unified the problem. So of the 141 jurisdictions that we currently source data from, we've unified the problem into a single platform, a single means of access, a single source of information, to remove the need for people to go and wrangle or talk to 141 different establishments to get that data. And then, as part of our mission, we've chosen to make that open. So I think one of the important things to kind of understand is why you would even bother building a company like this, or why any of these open data projects really exist. And there are a number of drivers behind the scenes. It's really important these days, given we're a global market, is to understand ultimately who you're talking to, who you're doing business with. There is a world of compliance and regulation being rained down on us. And again, to meet that, it's important to understand who you're doing business with, and transparency around the actual legal entity, the ultimate beneficial owners, sanctions, and things like that. And because the impact of doing that wrong has a major impact on your risk and reputation ultimately. And then there are a bunch of economic, social, and government-based projects as well that benefits from enforcing kind of moral or ethical approaches to things. So all of these things are kind of driving us towards a set of use cases. Now, these are not the only use cases OpenCorporates kind of sees, but these are the four kind of categories that we bucket them into. So our data, which is, revolves around identifying legal entities and their relationships, is used heavily in KYC, KYB, which is in fact how I came across the OpenCorporates data set when I was at Arachnix previously. It's used for investigations, so joining the dots between entities, be they people, organizations, how they relate, and that's typically used to kind of fight financial crime and spot other illicit activity. We've got other people that are trying to form a single source of truth, so kind of under this umbrella of master data management. So trying to combine it with lots of other data sets, sister data sets, and other private data sets they happen to have to give them a clear view of individuals. And then there's obviously a whole bunch of other social projects that are supported by our mission. So we do a fair amount of support of journalists, NGOs, academics, and whatnot, who use this data to uncover illicit activity. So if you ever follow Rebecca Lee, our Chief Impact Officer, you'll see a number of stories, a number of projects that she works in, which are starting to uncover things that have previously been hidden. These are typically for the social good. So with these use cases, if we ever think about what the OpenCorporates product happens to be, it's ultimately data, and then a means to deliver that data. So our coverage, as it stands at the moment, we cover 141 jurisdictions across 85 countries, roughly 200 odd million companies and offices that we have information on and that we publish to our clients and to people undertaking projects. Coverage is essentially our product ultimately. The way we deliver it and the information you get within it is kind of like a subset of the product. But with that coverage, with all the information we have, we stand by our provenance and freshness. So the data you have should be the freshest. You should be able to get it from any of these sources of information, and with a clear line of sight on a row by row basis of where the information kind of originated. And we're going to extend that further in the roadmap in terms of per attribute provenance, because as we start to look at more data sets, sister data sets that we may want to link in with, we want to be able to identify how and where we got the information from, so you can trace it back to source. And as I say, our product is the unification of all of this. Because we work in public data, you could go to 141 of those sources and get the data yourself with various agreements, but that's a lot of time and effort. So again, we've unified that problem and delivered to our clients. And then really, when we look at future facing, kind of where we're going to take this technically, it's all about the richness and usability of this data. It's all well and good having the data, but you need to be able to match it. You need to be able to build relationships on top of it. And I would consider that work that OpenCorporates should be doing, so that our clients and our users of this data can kind of elevate themselves and do higher value work in terms of investigating and understanding why and how this data is related. So as you'll see, we move forward, we talk about our product for a moment in terms of how we deliver and what we deliver. So what we deliver is coverage of these 141 countries. And if you're one of our clients or you've used our data, you'll know that we deliver that in a bulk file. so gigabytes of information in CSVs delivered on a regular cadence, or we also provide a RESTful API for those that are slightly more tech savvy. But when you think about that in terms of what OpenCorporates have done, our focus going forward is around, well, how can we deliver this data better, faster, fresher into the hands of our users? Because a lot of the time, certainly coming from an AML and KYC background, the most important thing was to have fresh data. Because if you're assessing risk of a focal entity and all of its related parties, if I have stale data or data that's out of date, it's actually very hard for me to ascertain the risk that is apparent. Also, freshness of data is important when you're starting to research things, because things change over time. So the three main focuses we have from a roadmap perspective are around delivery, coverage and richness, and then a third angle, which we're not going to talk about much today, which is around the operations of the business. So from a delivery perspective, I think everyone understands a bulk file. It's a whopping file and full of all the information for entities and officers. That's going to stay with us because it's really important for people to be able to bootstrap systems or flood a system with rich information. A RESTful API will still exist, although there are some things that we're going to be changing in terms of that in order to make our searches have a higher confidence rate in terms of their hit rate. But the real important evolution of our platform, and something that I think we're uniquely able to offer, is a streaming service. And when we talk about a streaming service, it's almost like Netflix for corporate registry information. We want to stream in real time for a value of real time, because as we know, some of these sources of information don't necessarily behave or publish as quickly as we would necessarily like. But we want to be able to offer a streaming service of all the changes all that happen in any of these corporate registries, be they creations, be they changes of attributes, be they people being put in different states. So a stream, I feel, is one of the most important things that OpenCorporates can bring to the bear, because it would be a source of real-time information. And we see a world where all three of these kind of approaches could be used in a lot of the different use cases that we see. So we have a number of use cases where people take the bulk file to flood kind of like a knowledge graph or a search-based system. And the problem is, as soon as you load it, it's kind of out of date until you get your next drop. Whereas if you were to take a stream and keep that information topped up, you could keep your knowledge graph topped up. You could react instantaneously to the changes that happen from the corporate registry. So one of the things I found perverse around KYC projects is that they'll build an entity profile, they'll screen it, and they'll base their decisions on the risk that they see at the entity at that point in time. And if you're low risk, they just may not visit your entity again for another year because you were considered low risk, despite the fact that something could happen 24 hours after you onboarded it, which would say, actually, I probably shouldn't deal with this entity. So it kind of makes you think around, if I had this information available in real time, I could make better decisions. And I could understand how the evolving landscape of relationships really impacts the subject matter that I happen to be looking at. So the combination of these three things, I think, ended up giving us quite a powerful toolkit for a lot of our clients to use and maintain and keep on top of the rich source of information that we have. And as I say, I think we're uniquely positioned to offer streaming because of the manner in which we source data. We drain data sources of 100% of the entities in any given jurisdiction. So we're in that world where actually we can figure out the delta at any point in time to say that actually this was a change and I should let you know about it. I know a lot of our clients are already doing that with the bulk file. So every time they take a bulk file, they're doing a comparison as well. But I'd consider that a reasonably low value piece of work, whereas actually they should be concentrating on higher value pieces of work around how they should use this information, not around just figuring out these changes. So I see the burden is on OpenCorporates to make this information easier to consume and richer and easier to use. And so with that, there's always going to be a stream inside OpenCorporates around further coverage. Okay, further jurisdictions that we want to see coverage. I think our view of the world is there's somewhere between 250 and 300 discrete jurisdictions that we would like to get data for. We're currently at 141, so we're kind of halfway through that particular puzzle. And even in my lifetime at OpenCorporates, we may not get to the 300, but we are going to make inroads into jurisdictions around the world. So we've just spent the last 6 months kind of shoring up USA and Canada. Our next focus is on LATAM. And that's mainly because a lot of our clients are looking at the data and they understand there's a lot of tax havens down in LATAM. And then once we've kind of mopped up that, we'll start to focus on Europe and then Asia. But in terms of what we want to do with that data, so this is one of the parallel tracks that we have. We will always have a data and coverage track where we source new information. We want to combine more data sources. We want to partner and link to our open data community partners because they are working on projects that are equal, if not better value than OpenCorporates, to give our clients and our users this data an unparalleled view of legal entities, ownership, sanctions, and all of the important things that this data allows you to do. But with that, we know that we have a burden on us to clean some of this data. Ultimately, although we have clean data from a registry and we are transparent in terms of where we sourced it, we also know that a lot of this information was entered by humans. And again, there's a lot of fat fingers out there. So some of the things that we can clean up just make this information more programmatically easy to consume. If we clean up addresses, if we normalize some of the codes that you happen to see, and if we can do that across all of these different jurisdictions, then you'll have a data set that actually is a lot more normalized and therefore a lot more programmatically accessible. So data cleansing will always be, again, one of those almost like whack-a-mole in terms of one of the initiatives that we'll be following through with. Also with that, there's further attributes that we want to kind of get hold of. No longer are people just looking at corporate registry information. They want to be able to anchor on domain names. They want tax IDs. They want LEIs. So we have a number of initiatives underway, some of them with partners, some of them under our own steam, in order to build up a comprehensive set of identifiers that you will start to see inside that information. And when we say inside the information, you'll be able to get it in the bulk file via the API or the stream. So in terms of once we deliver on our delivery mechanisms, any changes that we start to make in terms of the quality of data or the coverage of data will just naturally kind of be published via those mechanisms. And the last one, which I find super interesting, is document processing. We know there's a wealth of information inside of filed documents that is currently not exposed by any of the registries. So we are looking at an initiative to start mining that information. And again, maintain the provenance so you understand which document we extracted it from, a confidence of how well we think we've extracted that information, but to then publish it inside any of those delivery mechanisms. And again, with all of this, we're just trying to give our clients, our users, a more comprehensive view of trustworthy, transparent provenance information through any of our delivery mechanisms. And so far, everything that we're talking about seems to resonate with our clients who are trying to keep knowledge graphs topped up, trying to combine lots of various information sources into this single truth. So as I say, this is like a whistle-stop tour of our roadmap. But as I say, I joined OpenCorporates at the tail end of November, and I've arrived in a business where I stand on the shoulders of giants. So there's 3 other individuals inside the business that also have different insights and different views. So there's Rebecca Lee, who's our Chief Impact Officer. She does a lot of work with the open community and social causes in order to use this information. We have Tim Goodman, who's actually our Head of Data and Product. Again, so he knows a lot more about the sources of information that we're looking to combine and how we're going to be publishing that. And then there's obviously Eric, who looks after our customer success. So again, there's 3 further sources of information beyond me that you're more than welcome to reach out to for clarity or questions or just a general chit chat about what OpenCorporates is doing. So that was a reasonably whistle-stop tour of OpenCorporates. I don't know if it was too short or too long, but I'll hand back to Stephen to see if there's any questions.
Andrew, thank you very much. That was really, really interesting. I can't see any questions via the chat at the moment. If anyone does have any, please let me know or raise a hand. I guess one quick thing for me, does the changes you're talking about, does that change? Are you going to change the OpenCorporates business model or the pricing or anything in any ways? Or will it still be committed to largely being open and freely available for most users, but having kind of higher usage tiers?
Well, so there is always a commercial angle to a lot of businesses. So we have a number of commercial clients that pay for this data and the SLA that comes with it. But OpenCorporates is firmly wed to its original mission and ambition of providing this information for the social good. It's really important information when you think about it in terms of understanding who you're doing business with, how the world is interrelated. So we are still standing firm on our mission and willing to support any kind of initiatives like your own. Where this information is important to know. We're not diverging from it, even though there is a commercial angle to commercial users of this data.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. If anyone does have any questions, you can keep posting them in the chat, and hopefully Andrew will have time to answer them. But if there aren't any, we'll move on to our next speaker. Andrew, thank you very much. Or there is a question just coming from Josh, Andrew, if you want to have a look at that one. So
Yeah,
I'll hand over to, oh, do you want to answer that? Yeah.
So yes, Josh, there are plans to support alternative bulk file formats and different formats. Again, bulk files are here to stay. How people consume the bulk file formats that they expect, I mean, that will all just become configurable via our platform over time. So yes.
Just to context, Josh is the developer we have working on our open ownership register. So he's very interested to find out about the bulk data from OpenCorporates.
Right.
Thank you. Great. I'll hand over next to Jean from Linkurious, who's going to start sharing his screen.
Thank you so much, Stefan. So my name is Jean. I'm one of the co-founders of Linkurious. Linkurious is a company that provides an investigation platform used throughout the world by organizations such as Zurich Insurance or the Indian Tax Office to fight back against criminal networks. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about OpenScreening, a new initiative that we launched recently, and how it relates to open ownership. So first, what is OpenScreening? It's really a combination of a database and an interface to make sense of that. Within the OpenScreening database, there are 180K persons of interest, about 800,000 companies, and ballpark north of 3 million relationships. All of this data is available for search and visualization via the Linkurious Enterprise UI that I mentioned, and OpenScreening really puts a wealth of information at the disposal of compliance professionals and data journalists. You can find more information about the project here, and I will be sharing the link in the chat section. So that's a bit of an overview of the OpenScreening project. It can be used in a wide range of use cases. You can use it for due diligence type investigations, for know your customers investigations, for email investigations, or for data journalism projects. Now I want to talk a little bit about the data within OpenScreening. So we are working with partners on that. The number one partner I would say is OpenSanctions. And I believe that there was a talk in the previous showcase about this project. Basically, it's a database built out with open information related to politically exposed persons, sanctions individuals, and it's a very interesting resource when it comes to compliance and financial crime. We are also integrating the ICIJ offshore database from the organization behind the Panama Papers investigation. And we are actually currently working on integrating the open ownership data into this database. So it's work in progress, and I will be doing a bit of a demo of the current status of the integration. All of this information is consolidated via the follow the money ontology, and we are using nomenclature for entity resolution. So that's some information about the data behind the project. And now I'm going to try to show you in practice via a demo how it looks like. So I'm going to close my screen now. Okay. So this is the Linkurious Enterprise UI. We are currently connected to a new version of the OpenScreening data that includes not only the OpenSanctions data set and the ICIJ offshore database, but also the open ownership data. And I'm going to showcase two use cases. First, I will investigate an entity of interest within the open ownership data set, and we'll see how we can enrich our understanding of this entity via OpenSanctions and the ICIJ offshore database. And then we will screen the entire database to identify suspicious patterns. So for my first use case, I'm going to investigate an entity of interest called Petropars. So I'm typing that text. I can see a result here. So we see that this is related to a legal entity called Petropars UK Limited. We see that this entity has an open ownership ID and an incorporation that date, among other things. So this entity is really coming from the open ownership data set. And via this source of information, we have access to a bunch of information, such as the jurisdiction, the registration number, and more. But if we are looking at this entity only in the context of open ownership, we may miss some critical insights that can be provided by OpenSanctions and by ICIJ offshore database. So I'm going to go ahead and double click, and I'm going to retrieve two nodes. First, we see that this entity is showing a name with another entity, and secondly, it's showing an ID with another entity. I'm going to go ahead and expand, and we see that we are bringing up a new entity to the screen called Petropars UK Limited. So it's showing the name and the identifier with the Petropars UK Limited from the open ownership. Except this entity is coming from the OpenSanctions dataset. And we see here that among the other information that we have access to, we see that this Petropars UK Limited is a sanctioned entity. I can double click and retrieve more information about that. Sorry. So I can see that it's sanctioned by the Office of Foreign Assets Control. It's also sanctioned by the Special Designated Nationals list of the Treasury Department, and it really puts a new light on this seemingly innocuous organization. So right now, as you can see, we haven't really done any work around the entity deduplication between the open ownership data and the data from OpenSanctions and the ICIJ. So we have these intermediary nodes representing the fact that this entity and this entity are showing a name and an identifier, but in the future we will merge nodes when we encounter such a situation. What's interesting is that it adds some extra context to the entity that we were interested in, and we can follow sort of the trail. We can see that this address seems to be shared with another entity. Okay, and this entity itself is also connected to two other sanctions. Zooming out now, we see that we started with this entity, which is present in the open ownership dataset. And if we were only looking at this entity, we would miss the fact that it's associated with one and two organizations connected to four sanctions in total. So by mixing the data from open ownership with other data sources, we can really uncover new insights and screen out potential risks. So we have seen how the Linkurious Enterprise UI helps conduct this type of investigation. And I'm going to go back to the dashboard. And I'm going to showcase how it's possible to not only conduct ad hoc investigations, but also be proactive about identifying suspicious patterns. So I've set up an alert in the Linkurious Enterprise UI where I'm looking for entities that have an ID provided by open ownership. And I want to identify these, instances where one such entity is connected to a sanctioned entity. So Linkurious Enterprise helps me set up that type of alert. And then as an analyst, I can simply log into the Linkurious Enterprise UI, inspect the results. I can see that the first result seems to be related to Mohamed Hassan. So it's one instance of someone who is registered in the open ownership dataset and who is connected to a sanctioned entity. I'm going to open the open the alert to get to the bottom of this. So we can see, the entry point, Mohamed Hassan, with an open ownership ID, and we see that this person is tied to, among other things, an address here connected to this sanction entity called RSS, another sanction entity called Haji Bazir and Jardzmil Company Awala, and more such risky entities. On the other side of the visualization, we see another node, Laksha-e-Taiba, which is also a sanction entity, and we see that this entity is connected to yet more sanctioned entities. So what's interesting here is that with alerts, we can really be proactive about identifying risks. And here in this case, we identified that one entity, which is in the open ownership database, is actually tied to high-risk entities, and as such should be considered risky. Okay, going back now to the Linkurious Enterprise dashboard. So that's it for two examples of combining the open ownership data with data from OpenSanctions and the ICIJ offshore database, and an example of using Linkurious Enterprise to make sense of this data. If you want to know more, or if you want to actually try out the OpenScreening tool, you can connect to linkuriousenterprise.com and click on a link to get access to this resource. Right now, the open ownership information is not there, not yet integrated, but it will be in the coming weeks. Let me know if you have any questions.
Jean, thank you very much. That was a very good, very risky individual, if you ask me, for the person you've identified there. There's a couple of questions that have come in on the chat from Lola, who's from South Africa. The last one she just posted is, are these the only 3 data sources that Linkurious are using, or are you going to look to incorporate more sources?
So these are the only data sources that we are using at the moment, but we are going to consider and to look into adding new data sources in the future.
Fantastic. Any other questions that anyone has before we move on to the next presentation? I really appreciate with the speakers today, everyone's having to present quite complicated projects very quickly. So obviously we're sharing the links, and everyone can check the projects out themselves and find out more. I can't see any other questions on the chat, so we will thank you very much, Jean. We'll move on to our next speaker, who is Cosmin from Blue Anvil. Cosmin,
hello everyone.
Over to you.
Hi. Sorry, just bear with me while I show the screen. Right. Well, firstly, thank you for having us. It was great to hear the previous speakers. It's clearly some interesting developments ahead, which we'll definitely be following. So as a short intro, I'm Cos, I'm the director at Blue Anvil, and today's presentation is a bit more technical. So if you doze off, we won't take offense because we won't be able to see you. But we wanted to talk a bit about the work we did on our product through Intel, which is a corporate intelligence solution with a focus on the UK market, and with ambitions to expand that coverage, the jurisdiction coverage further once we validate some of our approaches. But we wanted to talk to you about some technicalities and some of the stuff we worked on that have supported us in solving some important use cases. Now, firstly, wanted to say a few things about, sorry, let me just find some of this so you can see everything. So a couple of things about BODS RDF. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. It's an open vocabulary we developed with the community, and it's essentially a translation of the BODS JSON schema into an RDF language. If you look into it, you'll see you have a lot of the concepts and properties, etc., mapped to an RDF model like entity, person, interested party, subject, etc. But we've also expanded this with some helper properties or helper relationships. One of them, the most important being all controls, which essentially materializes the connection between an interested party and an entity. And as you'll see, this is actually quite important when we want to simplify the query logic in an RDF context. Spark queries would become a lot simpler when we crystallize this ownership and control relationship. I'm not going to go too much into detail on BODS RDF. You can read about it. There's a detailed proposal and also a GitHub repository which you can check out, and obviously you can get in touch to discuss any of this. There's already quite a few pairs of eyes on this. But more importantly, I wanted to look at some use cases in corporate intelligence and how these get mapped into solutions using these approaches. So first is a very common use case in discovering the control over a target, which is UBO. If you're not familiar with the term, it's essentially a beneficial owner which sits anywhere in the ownership chain for a target. So it's loosely defined. Probably you get as many definitions as analysts you ask, but for the sake of this conversation, we can say it's any individual that has direct or indirect control over a target. This is very common in risk and compliance and a series of related use cases, and with a beneficial ownership data standard and the RDF model, this becomes very trivial to solve with a simple Sparkle query. As I said, this is a bit technical, so probably not for everyone in the audience, but it just shows the simplicity of getting to that data using the inherent graph model of BODS. And when we put this graph model into an actual RDF database, it becomes very powerful. And you already see here we're using the shortcut owns or controls property, which simplifies the navigation of this ownership network, and obviously reduces the complexity of the Spark query. There's a gist for this, and obviously there's some resources at the end if you want to get into the details of it, but I just wanted to touch on this briefly. Another common use case is ultimate parents. Again, something that there isn't 100% agreement about in terms of definition, but for this purpose, we're going to call these the entities which are not controlled by any other entity and are controlling or owning the target directly or indirectly. Again, a very important use case, especially when establishing the complete interests in a target. Again, very straightforward to work this out. Yeah, sort of. We decided to split this into two separate steps. So firstly, we go with a query that finds these nodes at the top, and that's again very simple with a graph model, and it's very easy to go up the ownership chain as far as it goes. And the second step is, once we've identified these ultimate parents, to find these intermediate relationships. So in essence, we want to produce this kind of like inverted tree, if you wish, where we have the ultimate parents at the top and everything in between them and the target after that, below that. Now, this is if you run a query like this, you'll see that actually this returns all the corporate network. So not just the nodes here, but also everything else that is owned by these other ultimate parents. But that's because we need that from some other processing, and that's why we designed it like this. So there's some post-processing here which passes that complete ownership network and produces this inverted tree, which in essence results in something like this in practice, where we get the complete structure, the companies, ultimate parents at the top, and the relationships between them. So again, really harvesting the graph nature of the BODS schema using RDF. Now, a use case that is not at all dissimilar from what John was presenting is flagging deep risks, if you wish. So looking at a target, trying to find the companies that companies and individuals which are exposed to some sort of risk. Now, in our case, is a watch list, OpenSanctions, and this is essentially trying to figure out if there are likely matches or very likely matches anywhere within the ownership network for a target. This is has a lot of applications. It's an approach that can solve several problems, not just watch list matching. You could go and say, I don't know, I want subsidiaries which have made political donations or parent companies owned by celebrities. So there's a whole set of use cases here, but we're still working on this concept, and we need a couple more months to put more meat on it before we can show you some details about how we see this working in practice. Now, in terms of implementation, just a couple of words here. I thought it's important to discuss how we approach the design of the system when it comes to building a product on top of this data. And we decided early on to go with a hybrid solution where we store the relationships and connections between entities in an RDF triple store, and we query that triple store, and we dereference those statements at runtime from a document store. And this obviously doesn't come without the minor performance penalty, but that is completely outweighed by the fact that the footprint of the RDF triple store is massively reduced, and the query complexity is a lot smaller. It also has the benefit that you can, for example, use the document store as a source of truth, and the RDF triple store as a view on that data. So it's just a bit of technicality of how we design this and how we validate some of these concepts, because it's important to consider the fact that, for example, open ownership, the register is massive as it is, and it's bound to, from what I've been told, is bound to massively increase over the next few years. When it comes to identifying ownership and control, navigating ownership networks, which are very complex, you're better off to making that as efficient as possible. So there's a few resources here if you're interested in BODS RDF. Obviously, it's just to get in touch and have a play and discuss this. We want as many pairs of eyes as possible. It's still very much work in progress, but we believe we make headways with it. And that's me.
Cool. Thank you very much. Very, very interesting presentation. I've just asked people on the chat to see if they've got any questions. Just to quickly share, the product that Cos was talking about there is called True Intel, which also incorporates data from other sources in the UK, like the contracts and the coronavirus data on grants. And so it's very interesting, and you can sign up for a demo to try that product out if you are wanting to. I can't see any.
Yes, I didn't want to do too much product placement.
No, sure. I was just mentioning, you're being too modest. I was just mentioning that, that it is available for people to test out if they want to There's a question from Favor, who's one of my colleagues at OpenCorporates. Can you? So I'll read it out. It says, if an ultimate parent's ownership in a subsidiary company is really minimal, say 2% of the subsidiary is owned by natural persons, would you still classify that as ultimate parent? That ultimate parent as an ultimate parent?
That's a very good question. It's really a matter of discussing this on a case-by-case basis. Again, it's a very loose definition, and in this case, in this particular case, probably you would only classify one as an ultimate parent. But again, when it comes to ownership networks and risk management, some people are interested in basically everything. So some things which are not necessarily ultimate parents might fall into that category of, I don't know, top parent or parent at the top that isn't owned by anyone, and then that kind of loosens the definition a bit.
Okay. There's a couple more questions, but I'm aware of time, and we've got our fourth speaker who's kindly agreed to appear. So, because if you can answer some of those questions,
I'll really try to answer them on the chat. Yep, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. So I want to hand over to Kate Wyatt now from the UK Competition and Markets Authority. Over to you, Kate.
Hello. Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks very much, Stephen, for inviting us to present at the showcase, and thanks to the other speakers for some very interesting presentations and also for donating some of their time so I can present as well. So I'm going to share the screen. Hopefully this will work.
Yep, it's working.
Everyone see that? Okay, wonderful. Yeah, so as Stephen said, my name is Kate. I'm a data scientist at the UK Competition and Markets Authority. So the CMA was set up in 2014, and it's the regulatory body that's responsible for well, competition and markets, and also consumer in the UK. We look at markets, we look at mergers, and a bunch of other stuff as well. I work in the Data and Technology and Analytics Unit at the CMA, which is a relatively new team set up about 3.5 years ago. And the team was created to meet the challenges of digital and data that are becoming ever present in the competition and consumer spaces. We're approximately 50 people at the moment, with a mix of specialisms, as you can see there. So we've grown a fair bit since we started over the last couple of years. And there's just a couple of examples there of the sort of projects that we work on and have worked on in the past. So the Companies House records project that's mentioned at the end there is the one that I am going to talk to you about today. Here's a little bit of background about the project. So Companies House in the UK, as you know, most of you all know, holds data for UK companies, their controllers and their officers. However, the data is quite messy. We've already heard mention of typos and fat fingers, and information changes. People move house, people change their names, people change ownership structures of companies, etc., etc. So Companies House is reasonably static, and the project that we started was to try and resolve some of these issues, and also in that last bullet point, as we've seen previously, explore the relationships between companies and individuals, companies and companies, etc. So the plan for the project that we had, initially start with the data, end up with a unique identifier for each individual and each company, and then deduplicate it so you get rid of all those typos and all those out-of-date data, and you end up with one canonical record for each person and each company, and then use those to build out a network graph representation. So you could see the relationships between the nodes, and also the types of relationships as well. So is it a shareholding relationship? Is it a director relationship? What's the, if it's a shareholding, for example, is it over 50%? Is it 100%? All that sort of stuff. So yeah, build the network graph database, store the database in the BODS format, which we saw in the previous presentation, and then create an API. So users can query the data and then generate the results in a network graph format, as we have also seen earlier in John's presentation. So the next slide is just a sort of illustration of this, of the information flow, how this would work. And the sort of eventual end goal for this is internal CMA use. So we can use it for example, if we're notified of a merger, we can look at the ownership structure. Is this going to cause problems with monopolization? We can also use it to look at things like market concentration. So yeah, how concentrated are specific sectors of markets? Is this a problem? Are there barriers to entry? That sort of thing. So these are examples of some of the questions that we can answer with this setup, with this project. You've heard most of these already today, I think. Ultimate owners, shared interests, common owners or directors, etc. And I just mentioned the construction sector example for concentration. So that's just an example. I don't mean anything against the construction sector, but as an example. And the other thing eventually that we'd like to do is add in more corporate information. So turnover, employees, that sort of thing. Again, has already come up in previous presentations. So this is where we've got to with it. I have mostly been working on the data pipeline side of things. So taking the data from Companies House, working on the unique identifiers, deduplicating. We used a library called Splink, which the Ministry of Justice developed to do this record linkage, as it's called, and then making that data available internally to go into the network graphs. The second strand is external engagement. Hello, connecting to people across and also outside government. And then the last one is internal user research. So if we're going to build an app that internal CMA users are going to use, we want to build one that they will find useful. So engaging with them and taking into account their feedback. So as I said, the data pipeline is the section that I've mostly worked on. The problem I've already been through. No unique identifiers in Companies House for ownership and directorship records. How did we solve this? So we took multiple data points for each record and then estimated the probability that they refer to the same individual or company. So name, title, etc. A few different data points there. So for example, is William Shakespeare from Stratford-upon-Avon the same person as Bill Shakespeare from Stratford-upon-Avon? Do they share the same date of birth? Okay, great. That's they're very likely to be the same person. Challenges with this: if you have, for example, partners who live at the same address, share the same surname, have a different first name, you have to put in different weightings and different thresholds to ensure that you're not saying that, for example, husband and wife, both directors in the same company, same surname, same address, not the same person. So this was an interesting bit of the pipeline to work on, definitely working out how to solve these problems. And because it's a balance of probability, we haven't solved it, but like to think that we've done a reasonably good job of deduplicating. And here's some of the data sources that we've used in the pipeline. The main one at the top is obviously Companies House. That's the kind of bread and butter one. We've also had input from Open Ownership with the BODS format, and then some other sources to give extra company information that are sort of add-ons that we'd like to have in, but not. But yeah, Companies House is the main one. External engagement, so we're in touch with others working in this particular area, although clearly not enough people based on what we've seen today, and we need to talk to more people. I'll just skip on from this one. And this is a prototype of the network chart, the network wireframe that we put together to connect individuals and companies. Having seen Jean's presentation earlier, that's what we're going to aspire to. I think this is very, yeah, like I said, prototype, just to see if it works. So the idea is that you put in your company name at the top here, or person name, run the program, and it will generate this graph. And then at the bottom, you'd get more company information or person information that would be useful. So in terms of what's next, building the wireframe into a proper app. So moving it on from the prototype, taking into consideration the user research that I mentioned earlier. And then we need to consider whether we want to do this in-house or via procurement. Leverage existing CMA analytical tooling and capability, because we do have some expertise in-house, but we need to balance that with external as well. And then the ultimate aim for this is to make the data RPA available cross-government for many uses that we've, again, already heard mentioned earlier. And yeah, so we're on the way there, not there yet, but that's the plan. And that was my last slide. So if anyone has any questions, I'd be very happy to answer them.
Okay, thank you so much for that. There's a couple of questions that have come in on the chat. Jean is very interested from Linkurious, was asking what graph database you're using.
Oh, that is a good question. I think I'm gonna say the wrong hit there. So we've got a data engineering team that are the ones who put this together. I think we're using AWS Neptune. I say we, it's not me, it's the data engineers. But yeah, I think that's the right one.
Okay, great. And then Pudo on the chat, who is actually Friedrich Lindenberg from OpenSanctions, who uses Pudo as his name, and Peo from Ontotext were asking about the record linkage, but I think they've already found Splink on GitHub,
okay.
So maybe they should go there to look at that.
Yeah, feel free. Splink, we found Splink to be really useful, and we've been talking to Robin Lineker, who's the sort of main guy for Splink at the MOJ, and he's been really helpful with helping us set it up. And so we had some fun playing around with all the different weightings and all the different thresholds. Yeah, it was interesting seeing some of the records that it linked together that you would not think were the same ones, but it turns out they were, and then some also that, you know, I mentioned the previous example of two people at the same address, same surname.
Yeah.
So yeah, trying to figure all that out was quite interesting.
Great. A quick question for me. So have users in the CMA used this in actual cases? Is there like live uses going on right now, or is it still at an early stage where it's just kind of testing? And
yeah, we're still at the early stage of this in terms of testing and the user research, but there's definitely interest from cases in the CMA, and this will hopefully be pretty useful going forward. But yeah, at the moment it's still in the testing phase.
Great. A couple more questions. So Emmanuel Silva, who's from the Data Standards Authority in the UK, is saying, in terms of describing and storing an individual's identifier, have you looked at the MPI or the natural person identifier? And he gives the ISO code link.
I would have to get back to you on that. So disclosure, I didn't join the project at the start. So I joined kind of halfway through. So I'm not sure what they looked at initially. So I will check that out and get back to you.
Okay.
But well, thank you for posting that.
And then a question from Josh: Are the weights manually chosen and adjusted, or is there some automatic way that you've been tweaking things as you said as you went along?
Yeah, it's so there's some recommended weights that come with the Splink package. So for example, for dates of birth, there's only a certain number of dates of birth that are possible. You're not going to get someone born in 1865 or something registered on this database. And in terms of a typo for that, it's it's a lot more difficult to distinguish a typo in a number than it is in a name, obviously. So we sort of assumed that date of birth was a good factor, so that was quite highly weighted, and then down-weighted things like first names, up-weighted surnames. So sorry, I'm moving on slightly from the question. So we used the recommended weightings from Splink initially and then played around with it, and we actually used a different similarity metric to what they had, and we spoke to Robin about this, and I think they might be incorporating that as one of their options in the next version. Yeah, we didn't run through them in a machine learning way. It was more manual than that once we'd got the initial weights.
Great, thank you. There's a few more. Oh, there's a load more questions going. Wow, is there a way that people can? I saw that the CMA is having a kind of data and analytics conference that's open to people in a few weeks' time in the middle of June. Is this going to be something that's talked about or presented at that? I was wondering if some of the interested parties here might be able to find out more. Or
I will get the link for the conference. So thanks very much for mentioning that, Stephen. Yes, we are having a data and analytics conference. I believe it's the 15th and 16th of June. We're still firming up.
I've got it here somewhere.
Oh, okay, great. If you've got it already, wonderful. I think we're still firming up what the final agenda is going to be. I think it's more going to be on the sort of algorithm side of things rather than this particular project. But yeah, I will. If it's on the agenda, it's on the agenda. Apologies for not being more sure about that.
Okay. If you've got time, we'll run over by a couple of minutes, but one final question from Andres, who works for the Tax Justice Network, is do you consider contacting individuals to confirm if they are the same person, or using other things like HMRC records or tax identification numbers in order to carry out that kind of deduplication?
So that is something that we could look to do. We're not using it at the moment because, like I said, we're basing it on Companies House data, and we're using this public side of Companies House data and the secure side of Companies House data. Not everything that Companies House has access to is available to the public. So we started with the public facing information for Companies House, but it's adding in extra information like this would definitely be more helpful for the deduplication.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much. Sorry, like I said, we run over, so I don't want to keep everyone.
Sorry, that's my fault.
No, it's not over. There's lots of questions. So thank you so much to all the speakers today and for everyone for joining. Yeah, hopefully it's been a really interesting discussion. We're going to upload this video and we'll then send it to all of the participants. So hopefully you'll be able to share it on to anyone who couldn't make it today but might be interested to find out more about the projects. And we'll also, we've shared all the links here, but we'll also publish a quick blog post with links to some of the projects and the presentations that people gave today. And hopefully everyone can keep in touch and watch these projects as they develop. So thank you very much again to all the speakers and to everyone else for joining today. And I will stop the recording and yeah, let you all get on with your days. Thank you.
Thank you.